it's really important to fund research by paleontologists because it teaches us a lot about life and zoology and biology and the way things work in the world, not just sort of over the course of several million years, but now, today, we can learn things from the past that have an impact on what's alive and living today. We can see how certain extinction events or changes in chemical composition or temperatures have affected things in the past, and then further on to now. We can also look at the sort of lifestyles and behaviours of animals that can be difficult in the fossil record, but still is determinable. And we can apply some of that to some of the creatures living today.
If we know how things evolved in the past, we can figure out how things will act in the future, and how, especially with current things like the mass extinctions we've essentially caused, we can predict how the ecosystem will bounce back. The more we know, the better we can predict the future.
Well, if we don't fund it, then we don't make all of these fantastic discoveries like coloration in dinosaurs, or what sort of brain structure they had. So some dinosaurs had more crocodilian-like brains, and some had more avian brains. We can tell how smart they were, and all these wonderful things. We wouldn't ever find them out. If we don't fund it, we're not going to know that, and we can't help what we know today with conserving our species that are still going extinct for several reasons, that some of it we're causing, but some are just natural occurring.
I think that's because many of these movies, they're not really scientific documentaries as much as they're kind of IPs and franchises. So things with Jurassic Park, for example, to kind of update them sort of halfway through their movies now it wouldn't be necessarily what the public would be expecting. Whereas scientific documentaries that are trying to accurately recreate them should be more focused on making sure we have the most accurate up-to-date image, whereas kind of the average moviegoer is wanting to see what they typically perceive as a dinosaur.
I think one of the big reasons why dinosaurs are still portrayed as big lizards in media is that around the 90s there was this thing called the dinosaur revolution, which is where we went from the old 1800s view of dinosaurs as really big, fat, lumbering, slow, dumb reptiles into a new age of realizing that they were much more bird-like, they were much more active, they could be active predators, and even the largest could be quite ferocious. And that is the kind of climate where Jurassic Park was made. And at the time, Jurassic Park was one of the most accurate and up-to-date pieces of dinosaur media that existed. Unfortunately, since then, we have had more and more discoveries made and more advancements in the field of paleontology. But Jurassic Park, because of its cultural influence, because of how popular it was, and because of what a big thing it was, has stayed in the public conscious as the dinosaur definition movie. So people still look to it as the way to see dinosaurs, not considering the fact that we're actually now 30 years onwards in science and we've discovered a lot more. And even Jurassic Park itself has not updated its image to try and keep with that idea of it being accurate and, showing real dinosaurs. So now we're stuck in a place where media is copying an old piece of media which was accurate and touting itself as accurate, but is no longer accurate.
Recently, you've only just started to see, in most recent years, the feathers that were present on some dinosaurs. So there's been probably 1 or 2 movies that have shown a feathered T-Rex, whereas all the really popular TVs like King Kong, you saw the featherless T-Rex. Jurassic Park, all 5 of them, featherless T-Rex, featherless velociraptors in all of them. It's just what the public want to see because it seems more terrifying to them and more appealing that you have this massive, scaly, toothed lizard as opposed to what it actually looked like, which is somewhat cuter in a way. It doesn't really appeal to the film industry, I don't think.
I'd say the most interesting discovery in recent years was the discovery of Sophie the Stegosaurus, because it was one of the most complete stegosaurs found ever. and it's been able to give us a lot of different sort of studies into, the anatomy, potentially behaviour, lifestyles. There's so much more that we could have understand which we couldn't have beforehand before we discovered this specimen.
Personally, I would probably say it's the discovery of there's a dinosaur found in China called Yi Qi, which is a Scansoriopterid, and I find it interesting because it's a weird one because it's another kind of dinosaur that developed flight other than birds, and this is sort of the first time this ever happened because even in insects, pterosaurs, mammals, flight only ever evolved once, whereas within dinosaurs it evolved in Maniraptorans, which are the sort of birds nowadays, and Scansoriopterids. But it gets even weirder because this is all within one group of dinosaurs. So it's sort of the same sort of animals competing for the same resources develop the same sort of plan. Essentially, it's just one developed a sort of dragon-like membrane wing, and the other developed the feathers that we see in modern birds.
By looking at the sort of amounts of melanin and eumelanin and various different chemicals and organelles and things, we can determine what colour things actually were, which I think is really fascinating to sort of know what colour an Archaeopteryx is, or the Sinosauropteryx is sort of orange and white, sort of banded, and various different things. It's really interesting to see these animals come to life in colour, which is something totally new over the sort of recent sort of decades. That's not been something that paleontologists from that time would never have thought possible, and now it is, which I think is just amazing to see. I think it could be possible. I think that's certainly something that science could achieve eventually. It depends, of course, on your definition of dinosaur. I mean, for all intents and purposes, birds are dinosaurs, but if you're sort of thinking of something with a tail and teeth, something of that kind of calibre, I reckon that could be achieved, but whether it will be or not is a different question, I think. I think ethics do come a lot into play with that. I know that there have been chicken embryos developed with teeth, or they've attempted to get tails and things by changing the sort of gene expression of the legs and things. You can grow more or less feathers like a silky chicken or something. So I think it's possible, but as to whether or not it'll get the go ahead, I don't know. But of course, over time, laws may change, politics may change. It may become more or less ethically acceptable as time goes on. I think society is in a sort of fluid motion, and most likely, I think, at some point in time, provided humanity survives long enough, inevitably there will be some sort of attempt at a dinosaur, and an accepted one.
I think there are a lot of problems with trying to clone or recreate prehistoric animals. So one of the problems with ethics that has come up a lot, particularly with mammoths, currently we have the entire mammoth genome, we have a modern relative which we could try to implant an embryo in. Technically we could clone a mammoth. What is stopping us at the moment is discussions of ethics, so things like we're no longer living in an ice age and there's no longer the kind of environment that a mammoth used to live in. Would a mammoth be able to survive in our modern climate? Would it be suffering? Would it have issues with finding food or dealing with the heat? There's a lot of questions about whether, even if you did create a mammoth, would it be able to survive and thrive in this world? And if you were to create it, is it our responsibility to ensure it is able to live and thrive? There's also some other questions. Obviously, we want to clone things like dinosaurs and mammoths to try and learn a bit more about what they might have been like in life. Things like what they might have looked like, how they may have behaved, how they might have interacted with their environments. But with a clone of an extinct species, there's the question of whether it is actually a natural expression of what the ancient animal would have been like. So again, with a mammoth, if it's not living in an ice age tundra and it's not living with a herd of other mammoths, is it acting like a normal mammoth would? Is it foraging for foods in the same way? Is it even really a mammoth as you would have seen a few thousand years ago? Or is it just now a hairy elephant or a new mammoth that is completely different to the ones of the past? And that's one of the things, again, with dinosaurs. We're proposing it as a way of learning about these ancient creatures and seeing what they would have looked like, acted like, sounded like. But can we guarantee that there's any actual basis for that? Are they going to be something completely different because they're living in a completely different environment, in a completely different time, without any members of their own species and their own natural behaviours to establish? So that's another question that we tend to have with the cloning of extinct animals. So very much at the moment, ethics is one of the things that we're struggling with. Is it right to have an animal that doesn't have any others of its kind? Is it right to create an animal just so that we can study it scientifically because we're interested? Is it right to create an animal in an environment that it might not thrive in? And these are all important questions and things that we need to consider. And at the moment, I think the debate's still ongoing, and we're just going to have to see how it ends up. The thing I'm most passionate about is education of newer generations.
I would say I'm most passionate about continuing the study into theropod dinosaurs.
Furthering my studies on crocodiliforms and
Paleobiology, the zoological aspect really interests me. Just working out how these creatures function and exist in their environment is fascinating to me. I love it.